Okay. So this is in the Synthes Journal, Paradox by Stuart Brock and Josh Glasgow. Stream marker. Okay. So here we go. All right. So look at this. They see. I like these people already. They're not even bothering with anything. They're just gonna jump right into this. Consider three theses. The ontological thesis. There are paradoxes. Boom. Let's just like hit up people, smack upside the head right there with some philosophical stuff. Paradoxes exist. There are paradoxes. The conceptual thesis. A paradox is a set of inconsistent propositions such that it is rationally permissible to find the conjunction of any proper subset of them plausible, even while being aware that the set as a whole is inconsistent. Well, this is a question then. Like, is the liar paradox, where it's just saying, I'm lying right now? I mean, you have one inconsistent proposition, you could say. Or do you have to reinterpret that a few times to, get the inconsistency? But, like, if there... Like, so what would the proper subset of the liar paradox be that you could find plausible? You could find, I guess, that I am lying right now, like this second. And then, but then in consideration, then, like, you'd have to find, like, well, is that true or false? But I don't know what a subset of the liar paradox exactly means there. All right, so you got the ontological thesis that there are paradoxes, and then you've got like an inconsistent like a set of propositions. So like you could imagine though, like a paradox is like everything I'm saying is true. No, everything Valpo says is wrong, and then Valpo K would say everything Nogur Zero is saying is wrong, and then you get yourself into a cycle because if I'm wrong, then what Valpo said is right. But if Valpo said was right, then I'm wrong. And then so you can get yourself into a cycle. But any given set, like when I say everything Valpo says is wrong, that would seem like it might be an incorrect statement, but it is a rationally permissible statement. So that's what like is right here. It's permissible to get yourself into a paradoxical loop by saying what you thought were reasonable things. Okay, and the normative thesis, if A entails B, then it is rationally impermissible for an agent aware of the entailment to find A more plausible than B. Yes, exactly. When we all lose our minds, like somehow. These three theses jointly constitute what we call the paradox. The conjunction of any two of them is plausible, but the conceptual and normative theses together entail that there are no paradoxes, a conclusion that directly contradicts the ontological thesis. That's paradoxical. Or our aim in this paper is to defend this claim. Okay, so they're saying the conceptual and the normative that there are entail that there are no paradoxes. Okay, why is if A entails B, then it is rationally impermissible for an agent aware of the entailment to find A more plausible than B. I mean, I guess, but they could be equally plausible, I guess. And if A entails B, why is it harder to find A more plausible than B? I mean, you want to say if A entails B, then like given A, then B is necessary. But like why? I'm not entirely sure. They're gonna have to explain this whole thing. But yeah. Okay, the ontological thesis. Not only do paradoxes exist, there's an abundance of them. Our favorites include Zeno's paradoxes of motion, the liar paradox, Russell's paradox, Newcomb's paradox, and the St. Petersburg paradox, the two-envelope paradox, the paradox of fiction, the paradox of analysis, the surprise examination paradox, the paradox of the question. But there are many more. You might even have your own favorites. Those interested in a catalog of the various paradoxes would be well served by consulting such aptly titled volumes as Paradoxes by R.M. Sainsbury, Paradoxes from A to Z by Michael Clark, Paradoxes, Their Roots, Range, and Resolution by Nicholas Rescher. All of these monographs are excellent recent discussions that give a more complete list of the different paradoxes than we can give here. But it is worth noting, even these catalogs are incomplete. There are just too many paradoxes. A conceptual thesis. Among the many ways of characterizing what a paradox is, we agree with Rescher insofar as he suggests that paradoxes are, inter alia, sets of inconsistent propositions, where an inconsistent set is one that either includes an explicit contradiction or entails one. Although this is a relatively uncontroversial claim, some philosophers who work on paradoxes don't explicitly analyze them in terms of an inconsistency, but their alternatives are often compatible with the Racharian conception. For example, R.M. Sainsbury defines a paradox as an apparently unacceptable conclusion derived by apparently acceptable reasoning from apparently acceptable premises. But notice that if Sainsbury is right, there is an apparent set of inconsistent propositions comprising the premises and the negation of the conclusion. Likewise, Van Heijenoort defines a paradox as two contradictory propositions to which we are led by apparently sound arguments. We simply note that the union of Van Heijenoort's contradictory propositions to which the apparently sound arguments lead us is where we can find the inconsistency. And anyone who does not know, which is probably most people, Van Heijenoort was a fascinating person. He was a somewhat important logician in his own right. He did some good work. He also was Trotsky's secretary. He went to war. He was like a Marxist revolutionary. He basically felt bad for when Trotsky got assassinated because he would have basically been able to stop the assassin if he had been there, but they had gotten into a fight like the week earlier or something, and he went off and to do some logic or something. He was killed in a murder-suicide by his third wife or something. So he was a interesting dude. So there's a good there's a good biography out there by I forget who did it. Is it the Pfeffermans? But one of the people who do biographies of philosophers did one of Van Heijenoort, and it's absolutely fascinating. Shane. So he was a logician but didn't see the problem with murdering everyone in the revolution. The funny story about that was he had gone to school. He wasn't a logician yet. Someone accused Trotsky of being nonsensical and you don't even know what logic is. And Trotsky was like, look, Van Heijenoort, go find out what logic is. Then I can tell them that I know what logic is. Van Heijenoort, when found out what logic was so good at it that he became a philosophy professor of logic, and then went back working for Trotsky and was like, yes, you what you said was okay. So he, I think, was a I don't know his feelings about murdering everyone, but he was definitely high up there in the Trotsky's inner circle. So you would actually, if you look up Shane, you might even know, if you know enough history of Trotsky in Mexico and stuff, you'll see Van Heijenoort. He may have, for all I know, he'd been sleeping with Frida Kahlo also. I don't remember exactly what happened, but he was friends with Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, that whole crew, because they were all mixed up with Trotsky. But and as you probably know, schooling does not make you a good person. So the fact that you work in a university does not make you a good person or anything like that. And I hope you're doing well, Shane. I should give Shane a shout out for anyone who does not know Shane. Shane is a fantastic streamer. He does sociology and history. And if you want to know about basically anything you can ask in history or current how the world got the way it is now, you can ask Shane on his stream, and he'll give you a way too educated answer. Yeah. So I'm trying to actually answer, did he see the problem with murdering everyone in the revolution? I'm not so sure. Actually, I think that was part of why he got into a fight with Trotsky, was how hardline certain things were. I don't quite remember exactly what the fight was about, but the funny part was Van Heijenoort was from a part of South France or something, and so he had a particular dialect of French dialect. He knew all the French dialects, and the person got into Trotsky's office faking they were false or whatever. They claimed to be from not that far from where Van Heijenoort was from, and so if Van Heijenoort was there, he would have been you're a liar, get out, or we're gonna kill you instead. And so it was literally one of these, if Van Heijenoort was there, Trotsky would have lived, but the assassin would have failed. But it was I think they did get into a fight about how hardline they had to go in the revolution. and that's why Van Haner was like off like at some university at the time, probably giving a logic lecture. And yeah, but yeah, fun history. And so like when there were like trials about like Trotsky later, like he was there, and like he said like one of his students was like, is that why like I saw your name on the news, like was that you at Trotsky's thing? And it's like he was like teaching like Logic 101. It's like one of his Logic 101 students. It's like, yeah, that was me. Anyhow, okay, so yeah, and feel free to ask more questions, whatever. As these alternative analyses suggest, though, there is more to a paradox than an apparent inconsistency. The set of propositions Jacinda Ardern is a politician is not the case that Jacinda Ardern is a politician is inconsistent, but there is nothing paradoxical about it. What then is the missing element? Rescher suggests that the propositions that comprise the set must also be individually plausible. Sainsbury suggests that the propositions must be acceptable or apparently so. Likewise, Thomas Bolander's SEP entry suggests that the paradox must be comprised of apparently true assumptions. We take these suggestions to be roughly equivalent. The inconsistent proposition comprising the paradox must also be plausible or apparently acceptable or apparently true. If anyone doesn't know, the SEP is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It was the first collaboratively edited encyclopedia on the internet, predating Wikipedia. It is written by professional philosophers who all get together and maintain a living document that updates over time, written by like experts in the field on basically almost all topics in philosophy. And so basically it's almost standard operating procedure now if you are going to write a paper on a topic in philosophy, is you open up the SCP entry and you go through like the bibliography there, because that's basically who you're going to have to cite or know in order to talk about stuff in philosophy, is basically what is going on the SCP. It predates Wikipedia. I think Wikipedia people may have even known about it at the time when they started Wikipedia. I don't know if they did. I can't remember, but they might have even known about it. Well, that's the thing. There are no edits. They're commissioned articles in the SEP, and so they're written by experts or like a few experts, and so it's basically like a journal it's basically a journal article in itself, written by a few people, and then they they go through some review process, but it's not like they're doing live reviews. They update it every few years, and so it's not like Wikipedia like in that anyone can suggest edits. It's that you have to every so often they decide they want to refresh it, and there is a refresh schedule. So like if you agree to write your paper, you're also agreeing to refresh it in like after X amount of years, and then and maybe more than once. And then if like you don't want to do it anymore, they'll find a new person to do it. But like that's what it is. So it is an update, and you have to be someone in the field to do that. But it's not a free for all like Wikipedia. It's a it's a bit more stately, like academic philosophy people doing stuff. But Plato.stan .edu. So everyone can just go there and check it out. Plato.stanford.edu. And literally most philosophers, they have a list of things that they want papers written on, but like most big topics are going to have massive entries that you can go read. Okay, and so what is a paradox? Again, what is it about being apparently true? It's not so much that it's apparently true, it's that you have to really want it to be true. Like you have to, it's not just acceptable or apparently so. You have to have already glommed onto its truth. A bucket lift, I wouldn't be surprised. Like I wouldn't even to write an article on there, because that would mean you'd be an expert in your field, but there's gonna be multiple experts. If I ever had anything referenced in that, would be really cool, because that meant that it was the standard thing to know, that like my article was became a big enough area on a topic that like everyone should know this. And not just like some throwaway reference. It would be a bucket list accomplishment to like have made it into the SCP as like someone who had something to say about a topic. So I wouldn't be surprised if people wanted to get that. I did just see one of the papers another paper I'm writing. Someone I was criticizing made it into a new article on the SCP, and it was kind of a throwaway reference, or like, oh, this person said something here that was like kind of like a new take on a topic, and it was like, this guy, they must be friends or something, because I don't think it's that good, but like still, the dude got a reference in the SCP, and it's like, that means it's like anyone who's interested in that is going to see that. So yeah. So what is a paradox? Like, the paradox is not that it's acceptable or apparently so. It's that it is immediately plausible. That you're going to take the initial statements as not just acceptable. It is that it is immediately you're going to react that this is correct, and then you end up in inconsistency. It's much more insidious because you're going to feel like you want to. That's why the liar paradox is a great paradox, because you say, like, I can tell you that, like, oh, that guy's lying, or I can tell you I'm lying, but like immediately, that's not an immediate contradiction. If I say I'm lying in this statement right now, that is that will generate the liar paradox. But because if like you understand what it means so readily when you say to someone else that they're lying, that is what it is. It's that you have to immediately glom onto it. Okay. Author says, while we agree that something like this plausibility constraint is a necessary condition for a set of inconsistent propositions to count as paradoxical, the suggestion needs amending if we are to properly distinguish paradoxes from mere inconsistencies, for the account is vulnerable to two kinds of counterexample. Yeah, mere inconsistencies, lots of things are inconsistent. You may not think so immediately, but like under close inspection, they become inconsistent. That's not a big deal, but you may not have cared. This is what I mean about, like, you have to glom onto it. You have to care that it's true. First, it seems that it is too easy to find counterexamples to the plausibility constraint as stated above. The discovery of someone dim enough to find both of the above propositions about Arden plausible is not enough to make the set paradoxical. Yeah, so like Arden is the prime minister and Arden is not the prime minister. You could get someone that is just dumb enough not to realize the logic doesn't work there, that they are and are not the prime minister. Exterminating, that's where we're going. We're killing those idiots now. That's not nice. Exterminating those who find plausible each of the propositions within an inconsistent set is not a way of solving a paradox. No, you cannot kill people to solve paradoxes. That's not nice. One friendly amendment is the following. A set of inconsistent propositions is a paradox just in case it is rationally permissible to find the propositions that compose it individually plausible. This amended proposal, though, does not avoid trouble altogether. It, along with the original proposal, is vulnerable to a second kind of counterexample. Consider the following thought experiment. A friend has 3 qualitatively identical cups in front of her. She turns them all over and places a ball under one. She then shuffles the cups around so that you lose track of which one the ball is under. Now consider the following the 4 propositions. 1. The ball is under one of the 3 cups. 2. The ball is not under the first cup. 3. The ball is not under the second cup. 4. The ball is not under the third cup. It should be clear that the set is inconsistent. Moreover, unless you, a rational agent, have some further evidence available to you, you will presumably be confident in the first proposition and give credence 0.67 or so to each of the remaining propositions. Yeah, so you give them each, 1/3 or whatever. And so it seems the proposition that comprise this set are individually plausible. Nonetheless, our intuitions tell us that most people would not be tempted to call this set of propositions a paradox, for in most cases, the plausibility of a conjunction of propositions will be less than the plausibility of the conjuncts. Okay, so this is what they're arguing, that if you take all of these together, that the ball is not on the first, not under the second, not on the third, and it is under one of the cups, that, like, you take all of them, the plausibility of conjunction propositions will be less than the plausibility of the conjuncts. That means if you have to combine stuff, like 4 different things, is less plausible than just accepting one thing. I disagree with this. I mean, they're saying in most cases. I don't think so. It depends on like the situation. Like I think in this one they're setting us up, but like we'll see if they explain what I hope they're going to explain. But if not, I'm gonna just like flip out on them in a minute. Okay. And so the discovery in this case that the conjunction of propositions 1 through 4 is less plausible than each of the individual conjuncts shouldn't be at all paradoxical is just what we should expect. Moreover, the discovery that the conjunct of 1 through 4 is certainly false is at worst interesting and informative, but it hardly counts as paradoxical. Okay, on the original proposal, though, the fact that propositions 1 through 4 are individually plausible but jointly inconsistent conceptually guarantees that the set comprised of these propositions is a paradox. Furthermore, the suggested amendment proposed above will not help us avoid trouble, for not only do we in fact find the propositions 1 through 4 individually plausible, we are also rationally permitted to do so. Indeed, if we have no further evidence available to us, it may even be rationally required of us that we do. Wait, what? Here's the thing. We all know this can't be true. Like, that's the whole point. And it's not just because there's more things. This is the problem. Just because there's more statements does not make the more statements the count of statements does not make that set of that set of statements less plausible, because you could imagine I repeated the number 1 over and over and over and over again, or I just restated it in different ways. And they're saying proposition, so in some sense a statement about like the world is like in an abstract sense, but you could have statements that are all logically dependent on each other, like these are by the story. So the fact that the story is the way it is, that's what makes it an inconsistent thing, and that's why you shouldn't believe any of it. You shouldn't believe all of these together, but that's not because there's a bunch of statements. That's because there's a history here, and this is what drives me crazy. I thought this is what they were going to say. Maybe they will below, but there is a logical dependency here. Like the idea of these being inconsistent has to do with their being grouped together in a certain way due to this story. Like this story about playing 3-card Monty or whatever. Where is the thing? These propositions are logically related because they're dependent on the same story. It is not because there's more of them that makes them less plausible. It is because the way the structure of the story makes it impossible that the ball is not under any of the cups when you know it's under one of the cups. Like, that's part of the issue. And so they've just pulled like a shifty move saying, well, we told you the story, but it's not really the story. It's that there's more propositions than one of them. Because why would you take the ball is not under the 3rd cup if you didn't have the story already? You don't know if there's a ball under any cup, like randomly. Like, here's a cup. Is there a ball under this cup over there? Who the fuck knows? Who the fuck would know what that is? That has nothing to do with anything. You have to know about the story. And so why would you say that just a conjunction of propositions will be less than the plausibility of any of the one statements? It depends on the story about what makes things plausible. And this kills me. This happens a lot. This was not where I was hoping they were going, and I still hope they backtrack on this, because this pisses me off. Like, because it's so obvious that the story point this way. This story right here, like right there, is why these statements are like make sense. There is no other reason why those statements make any sense at all. Like if I just gave you those statements without the story, they don't mean anything on their own. Like there could be 300 cups. Who the fuck knows where the ball is at that point? All right. Let's calm down. These people are not jerks. But let's see what happens here. On the original proposal, the fact that the propositions 1 through 4 are individually plausible but jointly inconsistent conceptually guarantees. Hey, evolve yourself. How are you? I'm okay. I'm reading something on paradoxes, which is something I know a little bit about, and they just made like a big goof, and I'm like angry with these authors now. But we're gonna calm down. I just before read a paper on yogic thought suppression, and I was thinking of you. So, Evolve Yourself is also a philosopher of mind and science and metaphysics, and does a bunch of meditation and chess and philosophy and some doom on his channel. It's great. Check him out. But yeah, so someone was saying earlier that you should not be doing total thought suppression according to this important text. And then the author was like, yeah, even if that's a bad idea, the text does say you need to do total thought suppression. So they were disagreeing with the commentator. But it was interesting. I liked reading because, I don't know much about this stuff. And so it was nice to get a different take on mind than I am normally accustomed to thinking about or reading. So they had something like this sort of stand-in, I don't want to butcher the word in front of you, but they had some stand-in thing. The mind is not a subject. The mind just sort of passively has this thing that is a reflection of the world. And once you realize that you are not the subject of it, it's this other thing, then somehow you gain wisdom. But yeah. Anywho. So. The suggested, you are rationally, this just makes me annoyed. All right. Let's read this final paragraph, and I'll try not to be annoyed with these people. Yeah, and feel free to ask questions and about all the things. All right, how then are we to adequately explain the difference between paradoxes and other inconsistencies? Yeah, Evolver says, they talk a lot about the subtleties of subject-object distinction. Yeah, and I had not heard this distinction before. So it was an interesting way to, start talking about mind as a non-subject. That I had not heard. So I thought that was cool. Okay, the conceptual thesis articulated in the introduction is one very natural way to do just that, to explain the differences between paradoxes and other inconsistencies. We claim that a set of inconsistent propositions is a paradox if and only if it is rationally permissible to find the conjunction of any proper subset of them plausible, even while being aware that the set as a whole is inconsistent. Call this the strengthened analysis of a paradox. Okay, see, this is better because they're not specifically using the stupidity that they just said above. They're saying, look, it's the relation of the way the conclusion is to the way you feel about the premises. That's at least I'm more on board with that. And that's the strengthened analysis of a paradox. The inconsistent set of propositions about Arden doesn't fit this strengthened analysis because it is not rationally permissible to find the second proposition that Arden is not a politician plausible. And the inconsistent set of propositions about the ball also inconsistent set of propositions about the ball also fails to fit the strengthened analysis. For the conjunction of, say, propositions 2 and 3, that the ball is not under the first cup and not under the second cup, is not plausible. Why not? That is completely plausible if you think it's under the third cup. It's just unlikely. What is a 5? Let's see. Okay, so this is, I still disagree with them talking about the ball example, but whatever. I think they're, what they said, a strengthened analysis of the paradox about the relative strength of the premises versus the conclusion, that does matter. Because what I was saying is, in a paradox, you have to glom onto the premises. You have to think they're good for some reason. And so this is what it is. They're saying, if it's rational and permissible to find the conjunction of any proper set while being aware that the whole is inconsistent. So that means you're finding the premises more plausible when you're combining them. So I hate this conjunction thing here that they're doing, that when you're saying the conjunction of any proper subset somehow makes things plausible. I don't like using conjunction in this way. I can't see why anyone would just assume that conjunction is doing something to the probabilities. That takes a very strong view of what it means to be independent. And as I was arguing above, the independency is not guaranteed, especially when you give a story about how there is, dependency because the cups were put together in a certain way. So things are not independent of each other. It's specifically said they were dependent on each other. And that's how the analysis should go. But this is the point, is that you have to understand that the premises are much more acceptable to you, but then the conclusion is completely unacceptable. All right, so continuing, and I'm sorry I'm ranting about this, but these things annoy me. The normativity thesis. The normativity thesis claims that if A entails B, then it is rationally impermissible for an agent to be aware of the entailment to find A more plausible than B. So if like the premises entail the conclusion, you have to have the A's be more plausible than B. Well, no, they have to follow from that, so it can only be as plausible as. Okay. We take this constraint on rational belief to be nearly self-evident, but for those who don't, it will be instructive to contrast this thesis with a couple of closely related but implausible principles. All right, no, put it this way. If you were deriving stuff from like A to B, that means the conclusion it inherits the plausibility of the premises plus the logic you use. If you're using a very crappy logic, then the plausibility of the premises plus the crappy logic gives you the plausibility of the conclusion. But it can only be up to the limit of the premises. Because what happens is I can prove anything. You just accept, like, give me anything you want. The moon is made of green cheese. Okay, the moon is made of green cheese. Therefore, the moon is made of green cheese. That's a completely valid argument. May not be sound, but it's a completely valid argument. But the conclusion is not. The premises are not more plausible than the conclusion. They're exactly as plausible. And so again, these people are slightly off here, because they say more plausible when it has to be exactly even or more. But like that's the way derivations work. You are inheriting the plausibility of the premises. Because if somehow all of a sudden, and I think they'll get to this, you think your conclusion makes more sense than your premises, then how would you have done that? Then you didn't derive something that was in the premises. You probably had to add something else in, or something else was going on, but it wasn't the premises that got you to that conclusion then. Okay, so if anyone has any questions about what it is to argue logically, I can go more into like these things, like what it is to reason in this sort of formal way. Okay, first, the normativity thesis is not the principle that if A entails B, it is rationally impermissible for an agent to find A more plausible than B. For there are many cases in which rational agents do not see that A entails B, and in such circumstances, they may reasonably find A more plausible than B. But when agents are aware of the entailment, the canons of rationality require that they do not find A more plausible than B. The normativity thesis captures this idea. Again, I would say at least as plausible as. So B has to be at least as plausible as A. But A has to be at least as plausible as B. You can't go the other way around, but it can be more plausible. You can derive a lesser conclusion from very strong premises. It's not rhetorically suggested that you do that, but you can, of course, get a somewhat weak statement out of very strong premises. There's like arguments against doing that, but it's not logically problematic. Second, the normativity thesis is not the principle that when A entails B, it is impossible to find A more plausible than B, even when the agent is aware of the entailment from A to B. Indeed, there are good reasons to think that it is in fact possible for human subjects to find themselves in this exact situation. Diversity and Kahneman, for example, outline the results of a number of experiments that suggest that most university students fail to conform to the normativity thesis. See, for example, their discussion of the conjunction fallacy. But when they do so, to that extent at least, they're being irrational. There are different interpretations of this, but yeah, again, there are psychological factors that go into things, and yes, you can sort of be aware of things, but that it may not be psychologically salient at the time. So yeah, what happens is, if you know the premises, then the conclusion has to at least match up with the level of confidence you have in the premises. Premises have to be more plausible than the conclusion. For those who need an argument, though, here is one, drawing out an absurd consequence of the contrary view. In order for the normativity thesis to be false, there must be a case where A entails B, and it is rationally permissible for an agent X who is aware of the entailment to find A more plausible than B. In order for X to find A more plausible than B, though, it must be subjectively possible that subjectively possible for X that A and not B. That is, it must be subjectively possible that A does not entail B. But given that it is X hypothesis aware that A does entail B, this seems to us to be irrational in the extreme. Those who deny the normativity thesis cannot agree. Yeah, I mean, if A implies B, and then A implies not B, again, is A contradictory? Well, is something like a contradiction, because then you could apply both A and not, and you could apply B and not, B and also not B. But then, what's the likelihood of A being rationally permissible? Most people say that it is not rationally permissible to be a contradiction, but that's the whole point. You have to have something that is less permissible than what your conclusion is, and that's fine. So, but you need it can't be more plausible. So I think there's some levels here of what's going on. Like there's some difficulties here. I'm a little worried about this at this point. So, if A entails B, then it's rationally impermissible for an agent aware of the entailment to find A more plausible than B. I'm so worried. Like, why can't I derive something weak from something strong? Why not? Or at least as strong as. That's very strange to me. You know, like you can't derive something, like, okay, the moon is made of green cheese. That's our premise. Therefore, the moon exists. So, I mean, that would mean that A is less plausible than B. Okay, that's fine. And that's okay. But say the moon exists. Hey CJ, how you doing? Thanks for the raid, I appreciate it. Thank you for the raid, CJ. Thank you. How you doing? How was your stream? How was the sweeping? Cirky, how you doing? What's going on? I take it you were sweeping. Welcome back to streaming. I saw you took a little time, but that's cool. So, yeah, I'm doing my philosophy reading thing. I hope stream went well. Oh, we should hang out. I gotta get out of this house. Yeah. So, what was I saying? I'm arguing about, like, you know, implications and stuff. Welcome, yes, welcome in. Yeah, so we're arguing at the moment. This person's trying to tell us what it is to be a paradox. Yeah. I mean, these are things I find a little bit interesting. I'm a little annoyed with them. Because, look, if I say CJ from NJ is one of the best Minesweeper players in the United States, and I say, well, then I derive out that, like, okay, CJ plays Minesweeper. It's like, okay. You're rusty on your Minesweeper? Yeah, I'm so rusty it's bad. Yeah. That's okay. You can get better again. But, like, again, if I say CJ is a Minesweeper player, you can derive out that CJ is a Minesweeper player. And so, hey, Ralocked, whatever. Just so everyone in my chat who is not a Minesweeper player, Ralocked is a former world champ. Like, Ralocked is amazing at Minesweeper. So, yeah, Ralocked. Oh, and for everyone who does not know, what I do is I read and react to academic philosophy papers in real time. So that's what I'm doing right now. So welcome in, and I know it's not for everybody, but then again, nor is Minesweeper. But yeah, this is what I do when I'm not, like, playing Minesweeper. So yeah, so you can derive, like, in some sense, weaker statements sometimes, depending on what it is. So, like, the old what was it? Heads of horses are heads of animals. And so, like, you can derive that heads of horses are also heads of animals. But, like, is that more plausible that a head of a horse is a head of an animal than a head of a horse is a head of a horse? I don't know. And so I'm a little worried about what they actually mean by plausibility here. Because a lot of times you have to be equally plausible. And again, I'm fearing this is the combination thing from above. That, like, if you, like, are driving A from A and B, a conjunction, and then they're going to say, well, just one thing is less, it is more likely than two things. But that's not always the case given the setup from before. Like, two things together sometimes are given a proper backstory. So the classic story I like is, like, if you say, like, you get, like, a bunch of, like, unusual, like, personal features. Like, someone who has tattoos is more likely to have a tattoo and a piercing. Just say, like, in terms of, like, personal features. Now, would it be more likely that a certain person that you know likes tattoos and piercings has a tattoo and a piercing, which you already know, or is it more likely that the person has a tattoo and has a piercing? Well, if you know the person, you may know that it is a fact that they have a tattoo and a piercing. Just like people like that like this sort of thing, sometimes it goes together. And say your friend has something like that. And so if it was, depending on what you're talking about, like across the entire, like, population of the world, yeah, it's more likely that one person or the other person has one or the other. But if you're talking about a specific person, then no, the chances are exactly 100% that they have both. And so it's like, it really is not more plausible that only one thing is derivable from, like, a more complicated statement, because there's a history here when you're talking about things with, like, a backstory. And so the world does not exist in a void. You cannot just take the logic and then read plausibility off that, because the logic does not tell you how the world is. The logic tells you the structure of how you're organizing things. It's a structural thing. It's not a plausibility thing. And this is a very subtle point that I don't think any fucking people seem to recognize. And it drives me a little angry. It makes me angry. So, but yeah. And they could put this in, like, Minesweeper terms. It's like, if you've got a 50-50. Now, is it in the left one or is it in the right one? Now, you're saying, well, is it more plausible that it's in the left than it is in the right? It is exactly equal. So what is the more plausible thing? Saying it is in the left or it is in the right? No, it is exactly equal that it is in the left or the right. And that's why this more plausible thing, just because there's two conjuncts, it's in the left and it is in the right, it is not a fucking... there's no such thing as more plausible, because the other one is exactly equal. And Jay Lane knows. Want to become famous by viewers, followers, and friends? Yes, I'd love to. Please, would you tell me how to do that, Jay Lane? Goodbye. Where's the ban on this? Goodbye. I haven't had to ban someone in a while. Shucks, I really wanted all those subscribers and viewers. That would have been cool. Okay. So yeah, again, what is the status of this word plausible right here? And I fear that they did not define plausibility. If you just want to get technical about what the problem is that I'm harping on. But anyway, okay. So I'm sure very few people care about my, like, real complaint about this, but, like, still, the idea that, like, you're just going to put stuff together and be like, well, one thing is more probable than another. No. You can't do that. Only in an abstract world can you do that, where things are not related to each other. When things are related to each other, then it is not the case that you can just assign probabilities and plausibilities. Yeah. So in one thing, there's, like, Minesweeper, where things are independent. The real world, not always. You know more in like certain situations. Okay, the inconsistency. Consider any arbitrary set of inconsistent propositions S. So, you know, my hair is on fire and my hair is not on fire. Next, arbitrarily separate any one of its constituent propositions P from the conjunct of the remaining propositions. So my hair is on fire right now. Either A, rational agents can ascertain that S is inconsistent and find R plausible, or they can't. Suppose they can't ascertain that it is inconsistent and find the conclusion plausible. In that case, S is not a paradox. Okay. So they don't realize that just by me saying my hair is on fire, then yeah, that's not inconsistent. Suppose instead that B, so they don't find it plausible that my hair is on fire, and then they can ascertain that it is inconsistent, and they also find it plausible. In that case, if they find it plausible, then the subjective probability of all the statements for the agent is greater than 0.5. So they think it's more likely than not that my hair is on fire. After all, if the subjective probability of R were lower than 0.5, they would find the opposite, that my hair was not on fire, more plausible. And if S is inconsistent, and if the agent is aware of this, they're aware of this, she will see that R entails not P. And so the subjective probability for the agent of not P will also be greater than 0.5. So from the normativity thesis. So either my hair is on fire or it is not on fire. And if it is not on fire, then you know that it's more likely than not that it is on that if you disagree that it is not on fire, then it is more likely than not that my hair is on fire. They're very have to use all this jargon, I'm sorry. Therefore, the subjective probability for the agent will be less than or equal to 0.5, which means the agent will not find it plausible that my hair is on fire. But then, since S includes P, S is not a paradox. Because if you know that all these things are like, what if one and then not the other, then you can like reason out that it's not plausible. Either way, that like my hair is on fire or it's not on fire is not a paradox. And that's because in any arbitrary set of inconsistent propositions, there are no paradoxes, but there are paradoxes from ontological thesis. That's paradoxical. Again, this is the problem right here. Any arbitrary set of inconsistent propositions. Who is to say certain sets of propositions are arbitrary? It doesn't actually make sense because most of the sentences we're talking about are not arbitrary sets of inconsistent propositions. They are extremely relative and relevant to us, and that's why we're talking about them. And so there are very few arbitrary sets of propositions that we're ever talking about. Who talks about propositions P, Q, and R? No one does that. It's just the logicians and like philosophers and very silly people. But like everyone else is talking about in not arbitrary sets of propositions, and that's why it's important. And so this is what's getting me riled up here. All right, the conceptual thesis revisited. One complaint against our characterization of a paradox might be that it assumes that all paradoxes are structured in the same way, or it can be reduced to such a structure. If it can be shown that some paradoxes cannot fit our characterization, this undermines the conceptual thesis. Doris Olin, for example, suggests that there are two fundamentally different kinds of paradox. Like Sainsbury's analysis, Olin's type 1 paradoxes are arguments in which there appears to be correct reasoning from true premises to a false conclusion. Like Van Heynort's analysis, Olin's type 2 paradoxes arise when there is one argument in which there appears to be correct reasoning leading from true premises to a conclusion A, and another argument in which there appears to be correct reasoning leading from true premises to a conclusion B, and A and B appear to be inconsistent. Yeah. So either you're starting off where, you get, you start from what sounds good and you get to a false one, or you start from what seems good and then there's another argument. You end up from good stuff and you get two different conclusions, and the two different conclusions are bad. So it's like you start from good and end in bad, or you start from good and you end in two things that don't play nice to each other. Okay, their reply. While we acknowledge that there are important and instructive differences between Olin's type 1 and type 2 paradoxes, we've also shown that they have this much in common. They can be reduced to sets of inconsistent propositions such that it is rationally permissible to find the conjunction of any proper subset of them plausible, even while being aware that the set as a whole is inconsistent. What's this? Stream Deck decides it's going to break. All right. This complaint might be pressed further, however. For our broad characterization of a paradox might still be too narrow insofar it does not include within its scope some puzzles that have traditionally been classified as paradoxes. Consider the Sorites paradox. It consists of a large number of propositions, and for anyone who doesn't know, Sorites is they're going to tell you. Large number of propositions. A collection of 1 grain of sand is not a heap. A collection of 2 grains of sand is not a heap. A collection of 3 grains of sand is not a heap. So you keep building it up. and at some point you do have a heap, but at any given spot you have not yet had a heap. So it's the Sorites. When do you go bald? If I lose 1 hair, I don't go bald. If I lose 2 hairs, I don't go bald. If I lose 3 hairs, I don't go bald. At some point you have gone bald though. So that's Sorites paradox, a very ancient paradox. Because the individual plausibility of each constituent proposition does not itself confer plausibility on the conjunction of each proposition in the set, on our view, the Sorites cannot count as a genuine paradox, but clearly it is. So we have a counterexample to the conceptual thesis. Their reply: we are tempted to hold our ground and insist that this so-called paradox is not a genuine paradox after all. There is an alternative response to this. Like Olin, we can distinguish between different types of paradoxes. A large number of paradoxes are of the kind identified in the conceptual thesis. It would be just as paradoxical, if slightly less interesting, to restrict our attention to the plethora of apparent paradoxes that fit our conception. The overwhelming majority of paradoxes discussed in textbooks are of this kind. But if the normativity thesis is correct, this entails that there are no such paradoxes. One might press us further by still suggesting that what makes the difference between what counts as a paradox and what doesn't is that paradoxes must contain a suitably large number of plausible conjuncts, otherwise the set of propositions simply does not count as a genuine paradox. This would explain why, for example, the Sorites and the lottery paradox count as paradoxes, but the shell game does not. I mean, they're allowed to have a pretty narrow version of paradox if they want, and then they'd have to say, well, the Sorites paradox is called paradox, but it's just sort of something else. I mean, they're doing this sort of thing where they want to define what a paradox is, and again, I don't love how they're using conjunction to do that, but again, I don't know if we're learning a whole lot here anyway. They say, if this objection has teeth, it would render the so-called paradox unparadoxical. This puzzle is composed of just 3 plausible theses, which I disagree with. Unsurprisingly, then, we deny that paradoxes have to be composed of a large number of inconsistent propositions. Many paradoxes require no more than 3 theses to state. Paradoxes of self-reference, or Hempel's Raven paradox, are paradigm examples. Moreover, we suspect that even the paradoxes most naturally stated in terms of a large number of propositions, paradoxes like the Sorites or the lottery paradox, can be recast, or are relatively similar to puzzles that contain just 3 theses. And for those people who don't know the lottery paradox is where, hey, look, if I give you a lottery ticket, you probably aren't going to win. If you get a second lottery ticket, you probably aren't going to win. And so that is the case for every single lottery ticket. But if you had all the lottery tickets, you're guaranteed to win. And so the fact that any given one is probably not going to win does not discount the fact that if you get all of them together, you're going to win the lottery. So that's the same thing as a Sorites. One of these is 1 grain of sand is not a heap. 2 grains of sand is not a heap. But if you have enough grains of sand, you are going to have a heap. But if you get enough of the lottery tickets, you are more likely to win than not. And so they're kind of similar, but that's why they're talking about this in terms of many propositions. Yes, I think there's a new movie coming out where someone is gaming the Well, you can game lotteries. I mean, you can. I think there's a movie coming out about that. People who figured out how to game lotteries. And, they won a lot of money, and then the government comes after you eventually, or bad people come after you eventually. If they think they can do it better, they can take your money. But, yeah. So, I mean, what the argument is here is basically that, look, this doesn't fit the shape because you have all these implausible, very small implausible statements, and then you have one big statement at the end where it makes no sense. And so, but they're saying they can recast the Sorites or lottery paradox into just 3 theses. So they're going to say the Sorites paradox, for example, can be recast as the following set of independently plausible but inconsistent propositions. 1 grain of sand is not a heap. 2, there are heaps of sand. And 3, adding 1 grain of sand to any number of grains of sand does not change it from a non-heap to a heap. So they're going to, get that, where did the camel break its back? Well, when you add 1 grain of sand does not make a heap at any given point. Okay, to claim that this set is not paradoxical in virtue of the number of propositions it contains seems, in our view, too arbitrary to count as a plausible diagnosis of what's going on. Well, yeah, but I'd flip that around on them and saying you only need 3 all the time. Why is it 3? Why not 4? Whatever. We conclude that the existence of paradoxes is itself paradoxical. This ticks me off. Like, it's just silly. I agree there are paradoxes. That's fine. And then this is the problem. The paradox is a set of inconsistent propositions such that it is rationally permissible to find the conjunction of any proper subset of them plausible, even while being aware that the set as a whole is inconsistent. So, like, if I'm telling you, like, my hair is on fire, which is plausible, and then my hair is not on fire, that's also plausible. If you take any one of them and it's inconsistent, that's fine. Okay, so that's like, yeah, but you have to be able to take 2 different things together and, like, individually they're fine. That's fine. But then if A entails B, then it is rationally impermissible for an agent to be aware of the entailment to find A more plausible than B. And this is it. The more plausibility right here. This is where they fall down. And the normativity thesis is wrong because you can do A implies A. And right there you have a counterexample. A. This is 3. And this annoys the fuck out of me because guess what? All logicians know that A implies A. So what happened in this paper? Really, this is a freaking logical thing. And this exactly disagrees with this one right here. A, therefore A. Like, I'm sorry. Like, this is like facepalm level of fuck up at this point. Like, A, therefore A. So A entails A. It is rationally impermissible for an agent to be aware of the entailment of A. Well, I'm aware that A entails A. And then to find A more plausible than A. No, A is exactly as plausible as A. And now what you can do is you can argue against that A implies A is not an actual entailment. So, but to do that, you'd have to say, well, it in some sense this is deviant. That if you have a statement that it implies itself. Well, how do you do that? Well, they didn't do that in this paper, and to do that is actually really, 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 really complicated. It is not so clear how you can say that this sort of statement fails. That if you agree to something, that it is also implied. Like, so I'm saying I'm in Twitch chat right now. Therefore, I'm in Twitch chat right now. Now, not a whole lot of new information is learned, but there is nothing wrong with the logic there. And this is it. This plausibility is not a logical thesis. It is something else. And so is it normative? Maybe. But where did that come from? And so it is not, this is not a, this is not acceptable to me. So, norm of rationality. How is this a norm of rationality? I mean, the logic violates it. And so if you're going to say that you have to, when you argue, thank you, Ralloc. I will try to drink. It is very warm in here at the moment. Now, why is it a norm of rationality? Oh, I don't know. You can argue this stuff because no new information is learned when you do this. And, you want to, like, in some sense, you can't gain any new information. No, you can't. You can gain, in some sense, information about individual things. Like, you can gain, like, a specificity in logic. You can't gain, like, something that wasn't in the premises. Like, the conclusion has to be in the premises. So, like, A obviously is in the premises here. But you can't, like, get, like some random fact out of, like, the premises. That shouldn't be the case. So that is the issue. And that's why the conclusion has to always be more plausible than the premises, because you're getting something less. You're getting, like, a more restricted thing, and that's why it's supposed to be, like, more informative. Not more informative, but, like, it's you're dealing with a bigger set of, like, propositions in the premises, and that's supposed to make you somehow more worried. But this is exactly the problem. Why is that making you worried? Especially in cases like A implies A, And as I was saying before, if you know facts about certain people, then, or like facts about the world, then the facts taken together are not the same as the facts taken separately when they are, you know, dependent on the same historical like story or whatever. So the world is not an abstract place. The world has relations, dependencies, and things like that. And so this is the problem. This is an abstract claim about plausibility that does not actually have a basis in the world. Okay. Anyone have any questions about this? Because I'm like, I was already fried today. And thank you again, CJ, for the raid. I didn't even shout out CJ. I'm a terrible streamer. I'm sorry. Oh, man. See if CJ's even still. There we go. CJ with the Club Penguin logo still. Yes, everyone will go check out. CJ's a much better streamer than me. She does cool stuff. My favorite, I mean, I know it's one of her favorite things, is like, it's just a favorite time of year is the local radio station here does the countdown. She live streams the countdown. It's great. Okay. Does anyone have any question about what the hell a paradox actually is? Paradox is basically where you start off with stuff you want to believe. And that's the point. It's not that it's more, like the conclusion's more plausible. It's that you want to believe the premises. And then the conclusion is unacceptably bad. So. And if I'm being objective, my complaints are extremely specific to me, although I think I'm completely right in them. Other people do not hold this, and so this paper isn't actually as problematic as I might be making it sound, because most people are not going to have this sort of complaint. Although right here, this A therefore A, this does look like a counterexample immediately, but like most people are not going to, they're going to accept this normativity thesis, but like this is just fucking annoying. Like this right here is really easy to get, and it was ignored in this paper. So